Right, okay, so something different for the pub now. So somebody mentioned last, oh, it was Ben, wasn't it? Ben brought a book with him to the
Oh,
pub,
that's right. Yeah, yeah.
and we ridiculed him. But this time we have all bought books with us, haven't we? So
Yeah.
James, what have you got with you?
Yeah, well, I've always read books in pubs. It's always been a thing that I've done. Now, this is crazy because I was racking my brains trying to think of what book I could show tonight. And it just occurred to me, I was literally in the pub on Tuesday night reading a fucking book. So I thought, why don't I just show the book that I was in the pub with on Tuesday?
It's a
Um,
Mills and Boone, isn't it? It's a Mills and Boone.
so it is a bit of a geeky book, I'm afraid. I mean, some people will recognize this when they see it, mainly people in the Beatles community. This is Four Sides of the Circle by Terry Wilson. So this is the Beatles' second phase, 1970 to 1974, and it's closely modelled on the absolute classic Beatles book, which you may or may not be aware of. This is the Ian MacDonald one,
Yeah.
Revolution in the Head, which came out back in the day. I mean, this is the book that turned me into a Beatles fan, really. He takes every single song and writes a little
Oh,
essay about it. It's, musicological, writing about the lyrics. It is a bit geeky. It's not too bad. It's not kind of like how many sausage rolls did Paul McCartney eat on the 4th of February. It's not as bad as that, but it's kind of it's a sort of academic, a populist academic book about the Beatles. So what this guy has done, he's taken the Beatles' second phase. Now, are you aware of what that is? It's a really interesting concept.
so is that to the end of Apple?
Yeah, kind of.
Okay.
So the theory goes that physically the Beatles stopped existing as a band in
Right.
1970,
Yeah.
but they were still tied together
Yeah. Through
legally
Apple.
until
Yeah.
1976. And during that period, they appeared on each other's records on a
Yeah.
fairly regular basis,
Yeah.
apart from McCartney. McCartney was off because he'd fallen out with the other three essentially. So he was getting Wings together, but the other three were constantly playing with each other on each other's records. So this
Mm.
sort of theory has grown up over time that really the Beatles story doesn't really end in 1970. You've got to push it back to 1975, 6. That's when they finally
Yeah.
completely severed. So essentially, what he does, he totally models his prose style and even the layout of the book. It's exactly the same. It's formatted exactly the same as Revolution in the Head. It's chronological, starts in 1970, April 1970, with McCartney announcing he's going to leave the Beatles, goes through to whatever it is, 75, 76, and takes every single song. And there's a little essay about every one. So, I
Brilliant.
mean, that is classic pub reading for me,
Yeah.
obviously, Arch Beatles fan. Prop me up at the bar with that. And
Yeah. I didn't know
yeah,
about that book, James. I've got Revolution in the head, and I'm
yeah,
fascinated by that period from the moment they broke up, when McCartney calls it quits,
yeah,
well, he announces it anyway, doesn't he? Through
yeah.
to the point where they dissolved that partnership, because it's fascinating that, for all those early 70s records, they were all getting 25% of the royalties for each other's records. I mean, that's just crazy, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
And I also find it fascinating that John Lennon sold the fewest records during that period as well. So
Mm,
Ringo sold more records than John Lennon from
mm.
that period from 1970 through to 75. I mean, that's
Oh, well,
just
that's because he did a country record. Of course, he was
well,
going to
there you
sell.
go. There you
Yeah.
go. But
Well, also
yeah,
John. I mean, John Lennon worked on the music that Ringo was selling. That was the thing. I mean, it
yes,
was
of
John
course
that
he did.
wrote "I Am the Greatest,"
Yeah,
etc. So
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's a fascinating period if you're a big Beatle head like I am, and it's just great to go through all those songs and just learn a bit about them. One great thing about it is that it explains exactly who played on every single song. So if
mm,
you want to find out who was on, third bass guitar on a track from, whatever album, Mind Games or whatever, this book will tell you. So it's a
brilliant,
reference book, but at the same time, it can be read as a book. So
cool. Right
it's
Cool.
then,
brand new.
right,
Cool.
Headley, what you got?
Right. So you said one book. I'm going to show five books, but
Of course
they're
you
all
are.
little books.
Well, I
So,
showed two.
of course, uh, this is a very short introduction to music. Yours was geeky. Mine is academically geeky. So this is sort of academic look at music and but like a really short little. And also, it's great. You can put it in your back pocket. It will go in your back pocket down the pub. That's good. So yeah, just a little book. This is by a guy called Nicholas Crook, and it sort of goes into just issues of how we connect to music and what the various things like that. But That's what I started with, and then I realised that there are other ones in the collection, and so also in my back pocket is the book about a short introduction to early music, where I didn't know this. I learned that jazz is improvised. The Baroque period, they improvised. There was a thing called basso continuo, that basically the bass and the sort of some of the parts underneath the main scored thing was improvised, that they had to improvise within a certain structure. And that's fascinating to understand that's where that kind of started, that idea that musicians were improvising as they went.
I've got a feeling that Bach used to improvise a lot of stuff. It was written down later.
Well, that would be that period. That would be that period.
Yeah.
I mean, also, the problem is back then there was music, but it wasn't written in the same way that we read it now anyway. But yeah, so that's an interesting little book. Goes back to sort of all the early sort of church music and stuff like that. Really liking that. Then you've got the one on folk music, which is great. It's all about the sort of, I suppose, the nationalistic ideas and concepts around folk and what it means and how we, how and what is folk music and things. So it really delves into the sort of cultural elements of it. World music. And that's a great little book about this. Obviously, you've got things about appropriation and sort of things like that, and basically the idea of marketing something called world music and how a ridiculous idea that really is. But that's great. Unfortunately, the one on country music is crap. It's great if you want just a potted history, but it does not go into the politics of it or the social context of it or anything like that. It's almost like all the other ones deserve to be taken seriously, and country music is gone, I'll just tell them about the Carter family and Johnny Cash and George Jones and the Nashville Sound, and then we're done. That's it, which is a shame because it's a real missed opportunity. The interesting thing is, although they've done all of these, they haven't done a jazz one yet. There's hundreds of these. Anything from absolutism to Zionism. So there's thousands of these little books there, but they're really good, really academic. Sit in your back pocket. You'll look really intelligent, and you'll be a pretentious wanker.
So when they do a 70s pop reggae one, let me know. That would be great.
Yeah. Well, clearly they're going to get to it eventually. They're doing everything.
Yeah. It must be so challenging to cram an entire genre into a book that size.
Yeah. It's just the idea of it being every single. In fact, there's probably they're all about 100 odd pages, 120 pages. So they're little short books, and great for the pub.
Do you not think that you not thinking much of the country edition of it? Is it because you know too much?
Probably. I was thinking this as well.
But it's a completely different approach. It is just a historical. What happened next? This is this music, that music, this. Whereas the folk music is looking at the cultural context of what folk music is, and the world music one's talking about the issues of appropriation and post-colonialism and things like that. These are seriously academically kind of minded books. And it could be done with the country music one, because there's all issues of white and black and gender and all kinds of stuff that it could be delving into. Because I've got some great books about the politics of country music and things like that. It's just a missed opportunity.
Yeah,
it'd be like if the jazz one, all they did is just went, here's ragtime, and then jazz comes along, and then there's this, and then the bebop, and then there's that.
Yeah,
So, John, what are you bringing down the pub?
Well, I've got a book which I reckon that you will both have read. I think so. I'm guessing anyway, and that's Joe Boyd's White Bicycles.
I haven't actually. No, it's been on my list for a long time.
You haven't read it, either of you?
No, I haven't.
There you go. Yeah. That's me giving you too much credit, the pair of you. I'm
too busy reading these tiny little books.
So I've just been away for a week with the family, so I've had a bit of time to. I don't read many books. I've probably got a touch of the ADD about me, so I can't. I find it hard to sit down and read for a long period of time. But I did get through this last week, and I bought it many years ago. Never got around to reading it. And where I live, so I mentioned earlier on that Edwin Starr used to live about 10 miles away from me, that direction. Well, Nick Drake is buried in Tamworth, not Tamworth, which is where Tamworth with an M is where Edwin Starr lived. Tamworth with an N is where Nick Drake was from, and that's where he's buried in the churchyard there. And last year, I met up with a friend just in the pub. The cemetery is right next to a pub, and we're having a beer. And he said, "Would you mind if we go and visit Nick Drake's grave?" And I considering it's only 10 miles away, I've never been there before. And I found it incredibly moving. I really did. And just thinking about that, when I was thinking about what should I read, going away, that's what made me pick this up because obviously Joe Boyd produced the likes of the Pink Floyd, John Martin, incredible string bands, but also he produced Nick Drake. No, I think he just produced the first two albums, didn't he? I think it was. I don't think he produced Pink Moon. But I was sitting on a beach last week. And I had my headphones on, and I was streaming. It wasn't a Joe Boyd that produced album. I was streaming Pink Moon because I've been reading about Nick Drake, and I must admit, I got quite overcome. I was sitting on the beach, and I really feel incredibly emotional listening to this music because I mean, I've heard that song so many times, that album so many times, but just the clarity of his vocal and his guitar playing. I really did feel, I say, quite emotional. And you're in that such a strange situation when you're experiencing something and which nobody else is, because obviously I'm on the beach, everybody's running around playing games and whatever they're doing, and I'm sitting there listening to Pink Moon on my headphones, and it was the most surreal experience. Almost made me feel a little bit claustrophobic, but a wonderful book. He's a great storyteller, an incredible life, and certainly that 10-year period, say probably from about 62 through to 72, just tale after tale, and the people that he worked with. Just in the early 60s, he got together a band, a group of musicians to tour the UK, all the old blues musicians, the likes of Muddy Waters, Sister Rosetta Tharpe, Reverend Gary Davis, all these blues musicians together going around the UK. Fascinating stuff. And he's just a young man to get this together. But yeah, a brilliant stories, brilliant tales, and definitely a book which both of you should check out.
Yeah, I mean, I should do, considering the number of albums I've got that he's produced.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, you even showed in your latest video the REM album that he produced, didn't you?
I was just going to mention that.
Right,
just going to mention it, because I finally started listening to REM after years of not listening to them. And the album that I've really found myself connecting to more than any of the others is Fables of the Reconstruction, which is the one that they did in London with Joe Boyd. Now, I've no idea how they came to hook up with him. Do you know, John? What's the story there? How did REM end up working with Joe Boyd in the 80s? It seems
they're not actually mentioned in this book at all. It starts pretty much in the early 70s, yeah.
Right. I mean, I'm going to guess it was Peter Buck, because in that band, he was the music historian. He was the guy that was the Beatles fan and understood about the 60s culture, whereas Stipe, I don't think, was that interested, really. So that would be my guess. But I don't think they were particularly happy with how the album came out at the time. But it's now seen as, I think it's now...
Yeah,
it's kind of seen as being a bit of a classic.
I've read, actually, after watching your video, I kind of went back to it and I read some stuff about it, and I think Peter Buck or Mike Mills, one of them basically said they don't know how, but there's this rumor came out that we don't like the album, and in fact that I think Peter Buck said actually it's my favorite album that we've done. Yeah. So I don't know, It's probably because it was a bit of departure from their previous albums, and their fans probably kind of went, "Oh, well, clearly we don't like it, so they clearly don't like it either."
Yeah, maybe. I mean, Joe Boyd, he produced the original Pink Floyd single, didn't he? He did Arnold Lane, and then there was a bit of a sort of mix-up, and he ended up not being chosen to produce the album. The first album was done by Norman Smith, who was an EMI staff musician. But Arnold Lane is such a pivotal recording. It's the first British psych record, maybe. I can't remember if it came out before Strawberry Fields or not. But it's such a great, iconic record, really. And Joe Boyd, he's kind of like, he's the lost piece of the puzzle with Pink Floyd, because that's really all he did with them. He just did their first single, and then, that was it.
But I think it's fair to say that the first album, the sound of it is very much modelled on that, on the production of that first thing. So if he hadn't have done that, how would have the first Pink Floyd album sounded? Because that was certainly a template for that sound, wasn't it?
Well, I think Joe Boyd was more sort of on their wavelength because Norman Smith was a classic kind of slightly, well, he was a bit older than them
Yeah,
and he
he
was a
was,
bit of a
yeah.
stick in the mud EMI staff guy, basically. And he sort of humored them, but he was always trying to get them to be a little bit more kind of
Mm.
normal. I
Yeah.
think Joe Boyd would have cut them loose more and maybe allowed them to be a bit more wacky and a bit more far out than they actually were. But yeah, that book has been on my reading list literally since it came out. I don't
Yeah.
know why I've not got round to it, but that's a good little prompt, John. I will
Have you got a
definitely.
copy?
No, I haven't got a copy. No,
I'll pop
no.
it in the post here. Yeah, I'll stick it in the
Oh,
post.
thank you very much.
Yeah,
Cheers, John. Thank
cool.
you.
Good.
Very kind.
You got 2 copies there, John.
No, sorry, James will have to pass it on to you after.
I'll pass it along, Headley. Don't worry.
Headley.
It's all right. I'll buy my own.
Yeah. Right.
Go to the
Well,
library.
well, there you go. That was a different night in the Vinyl Community Pub, wasn't it?
Yeah,
All right,
enjoyed it. It's
reading.
good.
Books as well.
Oh, books.
You know,
I
you
drank-
do your big educations. I don't know,
Yeah.
your big
I
brain.
drank precisely one Peroni. I didn't get to a second bottle. So how's that for a strain?
That's good.
Things aren't
Well,
what they used
I'm
to
going
be.
to keep going. That's my low alcohol beer.
You're still on the dry, Headley.
I am, yeah. It's just I can't be bothered not to be.
Fair play. Good. Excellent.
Yeah.
Right. Well, there you go. Well, thanks very much. And yeah,
Thanks for having me. Enjoyed it. Good stuff.
thank you for coming, James. Brilliant.
Thanks, James.
See you
Cheers.
next
Thanks,
month.
lads.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.